Well, the Prime Minister's first budget narrowly passed a crucial vote last night. It gained the support of Green Party leader Elizabeth May, and 2 MPs from both the NDP and the Conservative caucuses abstained. And new data could offer a glimpse into why the Conservatives in particular might not want to rush to the polls. A new Angus Reid Institute survey found that 52% of Canadians approve of Prime Minister Mark Carney and his performance. This is compared to 39% of Canadians having a negative view of Carney. Now, this gives the Prime Minister a net approval rating of plus 13. Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre, by comparison, only has a 34% favourability. But that comes with an unfavourable rate that is much higher than Carney's, coming in at 60%. And that means overall, Poilievre has a net score of negative 26, the worst that Angus Reid has recorded since Poilievre took over leadership of the party. Now, recent polling from Abacus data reported a similar net favourability for Carney at plus 12, and Abacus data recorded a higher net favourable for Poilievre than the Angus Reid Institute did, but it still had Poilievre's net impression score falling to the lowest it had been in a year at negative 7. So, it's a lot of math there. We're going to dig into those numbers a bit further and what could have happened if the budget vote failed and an election was launched. David Coletto is the founder and CEO of Abacus Data. Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute, and they join me now. It's good to see you both. David, let's start with you. Just looking at those numbers, I mean, what stands out for you right now?
Well, it's obvious the gap is what stands out, is just how much more popular Prime Minister Carney is to Pierre Poilievre right now. And to your point is that, you know, Mr. Carney's numbers are trending downward, but very slowly. And he's the one in office making decisions, and Mr. Poilievre's are moving down more rapidly. And so I think the real story in these numbers is just how wide that gap is growing, and the challenge that Mr. Poilievre has in growing and expanding the audience that's listening to him and looking at him as a future prime minister.
Shachi, you know, the -7 in David's numbers, more stark in what Angus Reid Institute put out at -26. Have we seen those kinds of numbers for a political leader who has, like, not been the prime minister, not been the premier, you know, had power, made decisions, upset people? Because you do see that when you've been in government for a while. How rare is that for someone in opposition?
I would have to, you caught me, I'd have to go back and check our own numbers. I don't think Andrew Scheer was exactly setting the house on fire, so to speak, during his tenure as leader, either before the election or after. And so I do wonder if those numbers would be comparable. But it is just very much a reflection of that polarizing, very divisive reaction that Canadians have to Pierre Poilievre. And I say that because there's another side to this story, or another layer of depth if you start to peel back the onion. So yes, he's at a -26 in terms of net population, in terms of the net overall respondent in the country. On the other hand, when you ask people who voted for the Conservatives in the last election, and who no doubt are very disappointed that the party did not form government, they absolutely are disappointed. It's not as though they're completely blaming him. He's got about 80% of the party base with him. He's, you know, about 78% of Conservatives view him favorably. Now, interestingly, that's not as high as the, sorry, did I say 78%? As the 87% of Mark Carney voters who still view him with a very positive tone. So he's trailing Carney on a bunch of measures. But, you know, when you get the power panel on next, or others who say, you know, it's over for Poilievre, he's done, he's not going to last the week, he's still got the better part of 80% of his base. So, you know, he can't charm enough Canadian voters to put him over the top. But he hasn't lost so much of his own room, even though he's lost caucus members, such that it spells outright imminent disaster for him.
Right. Well, Shachi, the Thursday power panel may say things like that, but not the Wednesday power panel. David, you've got a similar.
Today was Tuesday.
you've got a. Oh yeah, today's Tuesday. Sorry. You've got a similar dynamic in your numbers, David, in that Pierre Poilievre is still really popular amongst his Conservative supporters, but if you have this really high with your base, but really low with not your base, you've raised your floor, but have you lowered your ceiling? Like, he's kind of in this weird conundrum.
Oh, yeah, it absolutely has lowered their ceiling. And I think, you know, despite the fact that the accessible voter pool. So in our polling, we asked people, are you open to voting Liberal, Conservative, NDP? Those open to voting Liberal right now is exactly the same size as those open to voting Conservative. But among those open to voting Conservative, 1 out of 10, just over that, say they have a negative view of Mr. Poilievre. So he is off-putting to some potentially accessible voters. That is the problem. But what I looked at the numbers, and then I argued in a column I wrote that there is 1 in 10 Conservative supporters today who say they're there because of Pierre Poilievre. And so this is the paradox in a way that the party finds itself, that he is incredibly engaging and motivating to a subset of that Conservative base. 4 in 10 say they have a very positive view of him. That's like higher than Andrew Scheer or Aaron O'Toole ever got close to getting. But he is so off-putting to the rest of the country that you can't imagine any of them at this stage being in a position to vote Conservative. Now, that's all in the context of today. Today, Mark Carney is incredibly popular, relatively speaking. Today, he still has the trust of everybody who voted for him. A year from now, a year and a half from now, who knows what the world's going to look like? And I think, in a way, that is the gamble that the Conservative caucus and maybe Mr. Poilievre's team are thinking about, that if they just wait this out enough, the dynamic changes because the choice then for voters might change. Right,
but so David, just to follow up on that point, like it does not seem to me at this point in time, as you say, that Mr. Poilievre is at risk of a widespread caucus revolt. There's going to be grumbling, just like there is in Mark Carney's caucus, about the shift to the center or the right, depending on how you want to frame it, that they don't necessarily like the direction, and very likely will win his leadership review with a pretty big number in January. But what does this tell us about his viability to become prime minister? Because that's the goal here. It's not to stay as the opposition Conservative leader, it's to win the big job. What does this say about that path?
Well, I think it's complicated for him, and it's more difficult because you've got a smaller pool of people you need to convert, and you need all of them basically to come over and vote for you, and you need the Liberal coalition to splinter. So that path is far more difficult than it was prior to the last federal election, and certainly at any time in the last 2 years before Donald Trump was elected in November. And so that's the real choice, because oftentimes in an election, unless there's one overriding issue, it often comes down to the person and the party people feel can best handle the issue they care most about. It's not just about, do I like the person, but are they competent? Do I trust them? Do I think they can handle the issue I'm most engaged about? And so the only upside, if I'm looking at numbers, the only potential opportunity here is that on the most important issue facing the country right now, when Canadians tell us it's the cost of living, the Conservatives and Mr. Poilievre still have an advantage on it. So if this cost of living crisis gets worse, if people become much more focused on that, that could be a path for him to make an argument. But right now, head to head, if this is a choice between who do you want to lead the country going forward, I think the reason why Conservatives didn't want an election last night is because they would likely lose that contest.
Right. Well, Shachi, we're not getting an election. A good thing for me, because I thought it was Wednesday and not Tuesday. But you've got new data. Your polling here, we're going to put this up, also suggests the majority of Canadians don't want an election. 69% say it's too soon for another election, and 31% say a good time. So how much do you think that factored into all the little games and antics and tactics that we saw last night in the parliamentary vote?
Oh, I think it was very, very obvious that, with the exception of Mr. Poilievre's camp and caucus, none of the other House leaders, none of the other party leaders or senior MPs were prepared to do anything other than what Canadians, 70% of Canadians, were telling them that they want Parliament to do. So it's the fact that people did not want an election, they didn't want one on purpose, they didn't want one accidentally, and they don't want one accidentally on purpose, again, with the exception of that nearly 2/3 of Conservative voters, and really interestingly, not all Conservative voters, but nearly 2/3 who said, yes, it's time for a change, let's have a vote. But, again, David talks about the cost of living being a huge issue. We look at that. We look at healthcare, jobs and unemployment, particularly among young Canadians, where that number is quadrupled in the last months. Right now, they're going to say to you, what are you doing? Now is not the time for an election. And I think it is in part why we perhaps, Pierre Poilievre, as much as he doesn't tell us that he reads the polls, he's looking at these numbers as well and saying, okay, on the balance of things that could possibly make things worse, I'm probably not going to go out and start, you know, shouting in a very bellicose manner for the writs to be dropped, because not even 100% of my own base is on side with that happening right now.
Yeah, a volatile time, a polarized time, but not election time, at least not until after Christmas time. David Coletto, Shachi, Kurl, always appreciate your time. Thanks for being here this evening.